The sound of glass shattering under my fingers was softer than I expected. My cousin Vanessa's sharp laugh cut through the chandelier-lit silence like a blade. "Really, Lena?" She swirled her champagne, her fingers glittering with diamonds that once belonged to my family's estate. "That dress? Are you actually serious right now?" The dining room erupted, not with sympathy, with laughter. My mother's face twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. I could see it in her eyes, that familiar disdain, the silent agreement with Vanessa's cruelty. She said nothing. She never did. My name is Lena Whitmore, and I was 23 years old when I learned that family wasn't love. Family was a weapon, and Vanessa had just pulled the trigger for the 100th time. The dress was thrifted, yes. Cream silk, vintage 1970s, beautiful in its own right. But to them, it screamed poverty. It screamed failure. It screamed that Lena Whitmore, daughter of the late Marcus Whitmore, a man who once commanded boardrooms and built an empire, was now reduced to bargain bin fashion and forced smiles. I set down the cracked wine glass carefully, watching a thin line of blood trace down my thumb. The room smelled of wealth and cruelty, expensive perfume, aged wine, and the unmistakable scent of schadenfreude. "It's a beautiful dress," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I like beautiful things. Always have." Vanessa's smile widened. She leaned back in her velvet chair as if she'd won something. "Of course you do, sweetie. You have to settle for beautiful things. Some of us can afford exquisite ones." The laughter continued. Across the table, my uncle, my father's brother, didn't meet my eyes. My cousins looked away. My mother remained silent. I gritted my teeth and sipped from what was left of my cracked glass. What they didn't know was that I was already counting the insults, counting the slights, counting every moment they chose cruelty over kindness, and I was learning how to make them pay. 6 months earlier, my father had died, not from illness, from broken trust. Marcus Whitmore had built his empire from nothing, a real estate mogul, a businessman with integrity that was almost anachronistic in its sincerity. He'd made his fortune by keeping his word, by treating people fairly, by building something that lasted. Then came Claudia, Vanessa's mother, my father's business partner's widow, and her careful, methodical betrayal. She'd been trusted with his finances during a period when he was diagnosed with a terminal illness. He'd wanted to ensure his estate was in order, that his business would transfer smoothly. He'd handed her the keys to everything: access to accounts, board seats, authority over asset transfers. By the time the cancer took him, Claudia had already taken everything else. The fraud was intricate. Falsified documents, offshore accounts, shell corporations registered under Vanessa's name. My father's business associates, people who'd sworn loyalty to him for 30 years, were now bowing to Claudia, whispering that perhaps Marcus had lost his edge before he died. Perhaps he'd made risky investments. Perhaps Lena was simply incapable of managing his legacy. My mother, grieving and overwhelmed, had believed them. Or perhaps she'd simply given up the fight. Either way, I was left alone at 23 with a dead father, a stolen inheritance, and a family that had decided I was convenient to blame. I'd moved into a small apartment above Chen's laundromat in a neighborhood that smelled like detergent and broken dreams. I worked there full-time, sorting and folding the endless piles of other people's lives while mine fell apart. It was in that laundromat, on a Tuesday evening in March, that I decided revenge wasn't going to be grand or dramatic. It was going to be methodical. "You need to get out of here," my coworker Maya had said one night, watching me fold her 1,000th shirt with mechanical precision. "You're too smart to be doing this forever." "I need the money," I'd replied, which was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. What I also needed was something I hadn't articulated yet. A way to get close to the people who destroyed my father without them realizing I was getting close at all. 3 weeks later, I got my chance. Chen's laundromat shared a building with a small law office on the second floor. Patterson and Associates specialized in estate management and business law. I'd seen them dozens of times in the lobby, in the mailroom downstairs. Tired lawyers, harried paralegals, the usual cast of the white-collar world. One evening, I was cleaning the building's common areas when I overheard two lawyers arguing in the hallway. Can't keep up with the overflow. We need someone for data entry and file management. Someone detail-oriented who won't ask too many questions about confidentiality. Budget doesn't allow. I'll pay them myself if I have to. This is drowning us. My hand stilled on my mop. I waited until they passed. Then I did something I'd never done before. I went upstairs. The receptionist was young, stressed, and exactly as overwhelmed as the voices had suggested. "Is there someone I could speak to about a job?" I asked. "I'm detail-oriented, I work nights, and I can start immediately." 48 hours later, I was working part-time at Patterson and Associates, processing files and organizing documents for evening intake. The salary was modest, but it came with something far more valuable: access. Access to confidential files, legal documents, and the sealed records of estate cases, including my father's. The senior partner, a woman named Sarah Patterson, was skeptical at first. A young woman from the laundromat downstairs asking for a paralegal job raised flags. But I was meticulous. I worked quietly. I never asked for information that wasn't mine to know. I simply made sure to be there when information passed through the office. It took 3 months of careful attention before I found what I was looking for: the original case file on my father's estate. The documents were buried in a storage closet, marked as archived but pending review, due to questions about the validity of some signature transfers. Someone at the firm had been suspicious. Someone had kept those files, waiting for answers that never came. I found them on a Tuesday night in July. My heart had pounded as I photographed each page with my phone, my hand shaking with a mixture of rage and vindication. The documents told the story clearly. My father's signatures didn't match on the transfer documents. The forensic analysis, never completed or presented to the family, showed clear evidence of forgery. There were emails, too. An internal chain between Sarah Patterson and a retired handwriting expert she'd consulted privately. Their conclusion was damning. The signatures on Claudia's transfer documents were fabricated, likely by someone with access to my father's business stamp and frequent correspondence. Someone like Vanessa, who'd worked as an executive assistant in my father's office for the year before his death. Someone who'd had decades to practice mimicking her uncle's handwriting. I'd sat on the floor of that storage closet, surrounded by the truth of my father's betrayal, and I'd cried, not from sadness, but from something sharper, the knowledge that I now held the power to expose them. The next morning, I'd called Sarah Patterson into her private office. "I need to tell you something," I'd said, closing the door, "about these files, about my family." Sarah Patterson was the kind of woman my father would have admired, sharp-eyed, ethical, and absolutely committed to justice. When I explained who I was, she'd actually winced. "I wondered," she'd admitted. "The handwriting analysis came back 18 months ago. I've been waiting for someone to come looking for these files. The statute of limitations on fraud hasn't expired, but it's getting close. If this case ever goes to trial, we'll need testimony from someone close to the situation." "I can provide that," I'd said quietly. "But I need something first." "What?" "Time. I need you to let me work here. Keep these files safe and not tell anyone. Not my mother. Not any of my family, that you know who I am." Sarah had studied me for a long moment. "You're planning something." It wasn't a question. "I'm planning to make sure the truth comes out," I'd replied. "But I need to do it the right way. Legally. Carefully." "Revenge," she'd said, not judgmentally. "Justice," I'd corrected. She'd smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Same thing sometimes." "Okay, I'll help." But Lena, if you're going to do this, we do it right. No illegality, no shortcuts. We do it so clean that no one can argue with the truth. That was when everything changed. Over the next 6 months, Sarah and I had built a case that was airtight. We documented everything legally. We subpoenaed bank records. We filed FOIA requests for offshore holdings. We brought in a forensic accountant, a brilliant man named Daniel Chin, who also happened to be Sarah's nephew, to trace the money's journey through shell corporations and dummy accounts. The trail was clear. Approximately $8 million had been siphoned from my father's estate through a series of transfers to accounts held under Vanessa's name. The money hadn't been hidden carelessly. Claudia was too smart for that, but she'd been predictable. She'd transferred it through the same financial institutions, used the same types of offshore accounts, employed the same patterns of movement. Once you knew to look for those patterns, they became obvious. This alone isn't enough for criminal charges, Daniel had explained during one of our evening strategy sessions in Sarah's office. But it's enough to trigger an SEC investigation, enough to freeze the accounts, enough to force discovery that will unravel everything. The question was, when and how? We could have gone to the authorities immediately, filed a complaint with the SEC, the FBI, the IRS. But I'd wanted something more than legal restitution. I'd wanted Vanessa and Claudia to understand the scope of their own exposure. I'd wanted them to feel the walls closing in. We leak it, I'd finally said, not anonymously, strategically. We make sure the information gets to the right people, business associates, journalists, regulatory agencies, in a way that's completely legal and completely damning. That's revenge, Sarah had said. No, I'd replied. That's accountability. And that was when I'd attended that dinner wearing my thrifted dress and listened to Vanessa laugh at me one more time. Because I already knew the date of her next charity gala, and I already knew exactly what was going to happen when I leaked the documents to the financial press. For the next 4 months, I'd lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet girl at Patterson and Associates, filing documents and organizing case files. By night, I was the quiet girl at Chen's laundromat, folding clothes and watching the patterns of the city's invisible people. No one noticed the inconsistencies. No one questioned why I'd suddenly become so organized, so focused, so strategic about every decision. I attended family functions and smiled politely while they discussed Vanessa's business triumphs. I listened as my mother praised Vanessa's charity work, the very charity from which Vanessa was embezzling funds. I watched Vanessa purchase a second property, paid for entirely with stolen money, and I waited. The key to every good plan is patience. Revenge done in anger is messy and self-destructive, but revenge done with precision, revenge executed with the calm certainty of someone who's already won, that's something else entirely. That's victory. 6 weeks before the gala, I'd contacted a financial journalist at the Financial Times with an anonymous tip. I'd sent her a folder of documents, the bank transfers, the forensic analysis, the shell corporation registrations. Everything carefully organized, easy to follow, completely verifiable. I'd also sent similar packages to the SEC, the IRS, and the FBI. The journalist, a woman named Rebecca Chin, who specialized in financial fraud cases, had called Daniel with questions. He'd been careful to say he couldn't comment, but he'd confirmed that the documents were authentic and the analysis was sound. For 3 weeks, nothing visible had happened. The documents had existed in the hands of regulators and journalists, being verified and cross-referenced, building the case that would eventually take everything from Vanessa. But Vanessa had started to notice small things. A delay in a business deal, a bank questioning a transaction, her accountant suddenly wanting to verify some details about her holdings. She'd felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She just hadn't understood why. The charity gala was held on a Saturday night in November at the Fairmont Hotel overlooking the city. I attended in a dress I'd purchased with money I'd earned, a stunning midnight blue gown from a boutique that had seen better days but had a manager who recognized quality when she saw it. I looked like old money trying to be understated. And in a way, I suppose that was exactly what I was. A Whitmore reclaiming her place. Vanessa was there, of course, glittering under the chandeliers in a dress that cost more than my annual salary. She was hosting the gala to announce a partnership with a major tech company, a deal that, unknown to her, had just been put on hold pending regulatory investigation. She didn't know that yet, but she would. I circulated through the crowd, smiled at the right people, and waited for my phone to buzz. Sarah was in the building, in a private room upstairs. Daniel was monitoring the newswire, and the Financial Times had just published. The headline was perfect. Charity fraud ring. How Silicon Valley executive embezzled millions from nonprofit. The article detailed everything. The shell corporations, the fund transfers, the falsified documents. It named Claudia as the architect and Vanessa as the primary beneficiary. It explained how my father's original estate fraud had funded the entire scheme. By 10:47 p.m., 3 different news outlets had picked up the story. By 10:51 p.m., Vanessa's phone buzzed. I watched her face pale as she read the headlines her alarmed business associates were sending her. By 10:53 p.m., she excused herself from the gala and stepped outside, her perfect composure cracking like thin ice. I gave her 20 minutes before I followed her onto the terrace. She was standing at the railing, staring out at the city lights, her shoulders rigid. "Quite the night," I said softly. She turned, and for a moment she didn't recognize me. Then her eyes widened with something between recognition and disbelief. "Lena." "Hello, Vanessa." She stared at me, and I watched the moment understanding began to dawn on her. The terrible, crushing understanding that I might have had something to do with this. "This is a mistake," she said, but her voice wavered. "Someone's made a mistake. My mother, she would never." "Your mother absolutely did," I said calmly. "And you benefited. For years, you benefited from fraud. From my father's stolen legacy. From my family's pain." "I don't know what you're talking about." "You laughed at me," I said, and now there was something sharp in my voice, something that cut through her denial. "You laughed at me for years, Vanessa. For being poor. For being struggling. For being damaged. But you knew exactly where that money came from. You knew your mother had stolen it. And you let her because it made you golden." I stepped closer and she actually flinched. "The documents are real," I continued. "The forensic analysis is irrefutable. The bank transfers are traced. In approximately 2 hours, the SEC will freeze your accounts. In approximately 4 hours, federal agents will arrive at your mother's home. In approximately 6 hours, you'll need a very good lawyer. And unfortunately for you, Sarah Patterson just became unavailable." The color drained from Vanessa's face. "You did this? You did this?" "No," I said. "You did this. I simply made sure everyone knows about it. My lawyers will fight this." "With what?" I asked. "With money you stole? Money that's about to be seized? You can try, of course. But the documents are perfect, Vanessa. We've had 6 months to make sure of that. There's nowhere to run, and nothing left to fight with." I turned to leave, then paused. "You asked me once why I didn't fight back," I said. "You asked why I just accepted your cruelty and your lies and your theft. Do you know why I didn't respond then?" She didn't answer. "Because I was waiting," I said. "For this. For the moment when you'd realize that everything you built was a lie. That every moment of cruelty was a step toward your own destruction. That the quiet girl you laughed at was stronger than you'll ever be." I walked back into the gala, leaving her on the terrace to crumble in silence. The next 48 hours were chaos. Claudia was arrested at her home on Sunday morning. Vanessa's accounts were frozen by noon. News outlets descended on the story like vultures, each one competing to tell the tale of the embezzler exposed, the charity betrayed, the legacy reclaimed. My mother called me on Sunday evening, her voice small and frightened. "Lena, what have you done?" The right thing, I said calmly. What you should have done years ago. There was a long silence. I'm sorry, she said finally, for everything, for not protecting you, for not fighting for your father's memory. I didn't respond immediately. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't something you gave freely. It was something that had to be earned. I know, I said. We'll talk about that, but not tonight. Sarah Patterson called me Monday morning with updates. The IRS was opening a formal investigation. The SEC had referred the case to the Justice Department. Civil suits were already being filed by the charity board. Criminal charges were likely to follow within weeks. They're finished, Sarah said simply. Legally, financially, socially, they're finished. You did it, Lena. You actually did it. But I wasn't finished yet. Not quite. 3 months later, I stood in front of a glass office door in downtown, watching the nameplate being installed. Whitmore Legacy Advisors, Lena Whitmore, founder and CEO. I'd used the recovered assets to rebuild my father's business, restructured and renamed, but carrying his legacy forward. I'd hired Daniel as my CFO. He'd left Patterson and Associates specifically to take the job. We were focused on what my father had valued: ethical business practices, community investment, and long-term thinking over quick profits. Within 6 months, we'd attracted clients who cared about those things. Within a year, we were thriving. Vanessa spent that year fighting charges, burning through her remaining assets on legal fees that accomplished nothing. Claudia took a plea deal and faced 5 years in federal prison. The money was returned to the charity and to my father's estate. The businesses they'd stolen were liquidated and the proceeds donated to scholarships in my father's name. And me? I stood at my father's grave on a cold December morning, exactly 1 year after I'd first understood what I was capable of. I placed a plaque beside his headstone, a photograph of our business logo, and the date it opened. We did it, Dad, I said softly. Your name is clear. Your legacy lives. A year and a half later, I was invited to speak at a business conference. The topic was ethics, leadership, and the long game. Revenge isn't fire, I told the audience, looking out at hundreds of faces. Fire consumes everything, including the person who wields it. Revenge is something quieter, something colder, something infinitely more powerful. I paused, remembering that chandelier-lit dining room, the cracked glass, the sound of cruel laughter. Revenge is the foundation you build while the ashes fall around you. It's the success you achieve in silence while others wait for you to break. It's the moment of absolute clarity when the people who destroyed you finally understand that they were never as strong as you are. Someone in the audience raised their hand. Do you regret it? What you did to your cousin? I considered the question. No, I said finally. I regret that my father died before he could see his name cleared. I regret that my family chose cruelty over support. But I don't regret holding people accountable for their crimes. And I don't regret becoming the kind of person who could. That night, back in my office overlooking the city, I received an email. It was from Vanessa's attorney. She was being released early on good behavior and had requested a meeting. I considered it for all of 30 seconds before I deleted it. Some people deserve a second chance. Vanessa had had thousands of them, and she'd used each one to cause harm. Instead, I sent the email to my case file and turned back to the work in front of me, building something that mattered, something that lasted, something that my father would have been proud of. The quiet girl he'd raised had become someone remarkable, and the world had finally noticed. They told me silence meant weakness. They were wrong. That night, watching my cousin's face crumble on the terrace, I understood the truth. Respect isn't begged for, it's reclaimed. My father's name wasn't cleared by my tears. It was cleared by my documentation, by my patience, by my refusal to accept their version of my story. Your worth isn't defined by a boarding school's acceptance, a family's approval, or a cousin's validation. I learned that standing alone in a laundromat at 2 a.m., folding clothes while building my empire, not by who gets the credit, not by who believes you first, but by who you become when no one's watching. My silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Every moment they mocked me, I was counting. Every insult was evidence I'd never forget. Every lie they told became the foundation I'd build my comeback upon. If you've been gaslit into invisibility, if your boundaries have been weaponized against you, if you've been told you're too much or not enough, hear this. Your silence doesn't make you weak. Your refusal to perform for people who never loved you doesn't make you small. Your survival makes you extraordinary. Your planning makes you powerful. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. When you understand that revenge isn't anger, it's accountability. Subscribe and hit that notification bell for more stories about reclaiming your power, setting the boundaries no one wants to hear, and transforming humiliation into triumph. Because someone in your life needs to hear that their worth was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered. And when you're ready to stop being invisible, when you're ready to build something larger than the ruins of other people's lies, I'll be here. Because the quiet ones, we're the ones who change the world. The most powerful form of revenge is indifference to your enemy's suffering and investment in your own success.